Hi, everyone. On behalf of the WashU Alumni Association, I'm excited to welcome you to today's presentation, a conversation with Pepper Schwartz. My name is Sasha Chapnick-Sorokin, and I'm a senior at WashU from Iowa City, Iowa. I'm studying sociology and women, gender, and sexuality studies, and I currently work as a research assistant at the Brennan Center for Justice. I've really loved being part of the sociology community at WashU over the past 4 years, so I'm thrilled to be participating in this event. Before we begin, I would just like to explain the format for today's session. You're going to only hear and see me, our moderator, and Pepper Schwartz. The webinar will last about 1 hour. Following the conversation, we'll have time for questions. We encourage you to participate by asking questions at any time by typing in the Q&A box. Thank you to all of you who already submitted questions via your registration. During the Q&A session, we'll get to as many questions as we can. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Alumni Association YouTube channel following the event. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's moderator. Hetty Lee is currently a professor of sociology and director of undergraduate studies. She holds a courtesy joint appointment at the George Warren Brown School of Social Work at Washington University and is a faculty affiliate in the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. She is also the co-director of the Center for the Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Equity. Hetty received her PhD in sociology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2009. After receiving her PhD, she was a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Health and Society Scholar at the University of Michigan from 2009 to 2011. She currently serves on the Research Advisory Board for the Vera Institute of Justice and the board for the Interdisciplinary Association for Population Health Science. She is also a member of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, Division of Behavioral and Social Sciences and Education, Committee on Population. Her recent work examines the impact of structurally rooted chronic stressors such as mass incarceration on health and health disparities. Please join me in welcoming Hetty Lee.
Thanks, Sasha. I'm really thrilled to be part of this discussion with Pepper Schwartz. So first I want to share a little bit about Pepper Schwartz. Pepper is an on-air relationship expert for Married at First Sight, the Critics' Choice Award-winning Lifetime series, which is now in its 13th season. She is an acclaimed author, researcher, and television personality. So she has devoted her life to furthering the fields of intimacy and sexuality. After earning a Bachelor's of Arts and a Master of Arts at Washington University in St. Louis, Schwartz went on to earn her PhD in sociology at Yale University in 1974. Over the next 40 years, Pepper became a prolific writer of articles on love, sexuality, and commitment, authoring and co-authoring 25 books. Schwartz received the Distinguished Alumni Award from WashU in 2007 and served on the Alumni Council of Yale University Graduate School. The Human Sexuality Program at the University of Minnesota is creating a professorship in Schwartz's name on the subject of sexuality and aging. And there is a Pepper Schwartz Graduate Fellowship at the University of Washington in Seattle, where she has been teaching and doing her research since 1972. Pepper was the AARP Love, Sex, and Relationship Ambassador for more than a decade, and she is a romance concierge for the Salish Lodge in Washington. She continues to lecture nationally and internationally on intimate relationships, sexuality, and women's well-being. And I'm also honored to say that she is a colleague and friend. So Pepper, welcome. So excited to have you here.
Thank you. This is really great for me. I'm happy to be back at WashU for a moment, even if it's virtual. I had many really great years here, and it's particularly wonderful to see you again. You were my colleague at University of Washington until WashU showed the good sense to steal you over there. So if I had to lose you, this was to the best place possible. And I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Great. I'm really excited to jump in. We have a lot of questions to ask you, and I'm sure there's many questions that the audience also wants to ask. So I'll start with some questions that we prepared from the questions that people provided earlier on, and then we'll take some Q&A questions from the chat. So let's start with this question, Pepper. What are the most profound changes you have noted in the decades since you began in the field to now?
There's a lot, but I would say two things in particular. First of all, the whole breaking apart of dichotomous thinking about gender. The idea of a binary was in concrete. We couldn't imagine thinking otherwise until some data came up that we could not ignore. And it started some scholarly as well as public policy output on the topic of gender and its spectrum rather than its binary polar description. So that whole thing was really important. The second thing is many, many more diverse voices, both on race and class, personal perspective, challenge of both the lack of material or material that was really taken from too macro level and not the close observation of people's lives. So there are other things, but those two I think are really quite really big changes.
Yeah, those are super important changes. You're right. I mean, you can see a lot of that even just in the kinds of the ways that we see dating, who are the populations that we consider in all these dating apps and stuff, which we were also going to ask you questions about. So I'll save that one. But first, let's talk about COVID. So we're just curious. I know, COVID has changed everybody's life and turned our lives upside down. And a lot of people are interested in, and this is kind of a 3-part question. So I'm going to ask all 3 and then you can.
Okay.
You might have to write down a little bit.
All right, I'll try.
If not, I'm happy to repeat. But do you think that COVID has strengthened or destroyed more couples because we've had to be sequestered? And is it really true that divorce has gone up because of COVID? Is that true? And can you date? Like, is it possible to date during the pandemic? And if so, what's your advice on how to do that?
So on the first one, yes, I think it is both strengthened and hurt relationships. I think for people who are doing well and have good imagination and create good boundaries, I think it's been really some time to learn how grateful you are to have a partner. But for people who had issues, whose partner reacted badly to the sequestration, to people whose anxiety and fear overwhelmed them, and they didn't know how to take care of it, and there was really no place to run because everything was closed, and it could feel like a hot box. I mean, it could just bring out the worst in people. Whether there's a big divorce rate or not, I'm not sure. There's certainly some indication of it being so much pressure that a divorce happened that might not have happened under other circumstances. Whether the numbers show up as distinctive or not, I can certainly say it has done. I've seen instances of both, where the relationship got stronger and then the relationship, imploded. So it's a tough time. It's a tough time for people that way. As far as dating, I think, the whole world is almost good news, bad news. There's always something that's a flip side. But let me say the good news, given that we all know how bad the bad news is that you could spend a lot more time talking. And I think if you're willing to do the work, go on a Zoom rather than on a date, re-up on that you have to talk. You can't be distracted by other things. And so I think there's a chance to get to know someone better. And no, it's not going to be you're in bed by the 3rd date because it's kind of hard when you're worried about catching a terrible disease. But if you really have a connection, you can build on it. And so I think that's a good thing. I'd say go for it. Just, be careful and maybe wait till you're both vaccinated if you want to meet in person.
Yeah. Or maybe socially distance walks, like one across the street from the other person might work if you're in a nice weather place. I don't know, but it's good to know that help for dating.
Yeah. You don't want to get the weird quotient too high, which is like you're across the street, but we're together. I don't know. But even talking about that would be fun. Where's your comfort level? What could we do? Be creative, build a connection.
Yeah, no, that's exciting to think about. That's good to know that there's still hope if you want to date during COVID. So here's some of the app questions, but why has dating that swipes right and left so quickly become so popular?
I have a theory about dating right now, and that's what it is, a theory. I think people started dating 14, 15, maybe even earlier. And they've had plenty of time to get sideswiped themselves. It's pretty hard to date without getting hurt, particularly when you're younger and people are even more callous than they might be later when they have a little sympathy for you because they've been hurt already too. And so I think what happens is people are trying to lower the temperature. Let's do it on the simplest, most basic thing. We'll swipe right, we'll swipe left. The bad news is that nobody gets a chance to really see who that human being is. The good news is it doesn't hurt as much because nobody got a chance to see who you are. It's not a dating type that I would recommend for anybody but the physically arresting, because you aren't judged on anything else pretty much. And for some people, it's a piece of cake. They look great. But for others of us, we're more of an acquired taste, and we need some different kind of dating. I think people have divided into different types of apps because they found what's most appropriate for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know some people do a lot of, at least for some of my friends, try to do a lot of judging of the backgrounds, what's happening. So some people will always swipe. I don't know which one is left or right for. If you
I've forgotten too.
You probably know more, like people fishing. Like if you don't like fishing, like I don't want to see another picture of somebody fishing or something like that. No offense to those of you who fish. I love fishing. So, anyway, so it's interesting to think about. So what are some of the myths surrounding relationships and marriage that you think are important for us to think about?
Well, I think the biggest myth is that there's the one. I'm here to tell you, certainly from my experience Married at First Sight, that there's way more than the one. There are the plenty. And the question is, are you the person who's going to get in your own way from finding a person you could love that doesn't fit some mythical outline you've given them? And it is generally mythical, even if you think it's real for the first 20 days, right? So the biggest one is that there's really quite a few people out there you could be, that there isn't one or just a few people you could be happy with. There's a lot of people. And then I think the other big myth is to call relationship work. Work sounds, it's only work if you enjoy and love your work. I mean, put it in that thing. When you enjoy and love and the reward is great, you're going to have a lot of moments of flow. You're going to have a lot of great things. And then there will be things that call on you to be a grown-up, to not say, I didn't like that. I'm going to fold up my cards and I'm quitting this game. That's people do that a lot. That's what you can't do. The myth that you'll know when it's over. No, you don't all the time. The myth that, that you're not going to have to, if it's the right person, you wouldn't have to compromise or experience some loss. I mean, the fact is there are things to find someone who is wonderful always means that there's something not wonderful about them as well. And the art of it is, of course, getting enough of the good stuff to be okay with the bad stuff. I've sometimes thought that some wit once said that, marriage is when you can stand the things you don't like in the other person, and I think there is some of that, some stuff, some weird thing somebody else does and you go, oh, I'm sorry, I'm out of here. But when there's a lot of good stuff, then you go like, well, that's just him or her, There's a lot of myths about relationship. We could keep going on that one, but I know there's a lot of questions.
So you said, just to reiterate, so marriage, I mean, when we think about marriage, we shouldn't be talking about it like work. If it is work, it's joyful work is kind of what you're saying there. So we shouldn't always be, I feel like there is that myth that it's really hard to be married and it's going to be, treacherous or, drudgery oftentimes, but that's not a good way to think about marriage at all.
No, it's going to be great with challenges. It's going to be great with disappointments. Work is like that too. I mean, we think of work like, when you say work, it sounds like you're digging ditches in the sun. It's tough work and there's not much that's rewarding about it. But no, the big reward is intimacy and someone who has your back and someone who's interesting to be with. And then sometimes there's a clash of wills or expectations or exogenous exterior things that happen to you and you don't react, or your partner doesn't react in the way you hope they would. I mean, yeah, that stuff happens, but it would happen if you were single too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay, another question about divorce. So what is the divorce rate right now? And will millennials follow in the footsteps of the boomers with the divorce rates?
Well, the divorce rate is a tough one because it depends who you read, really. Um, I've heard maybe from scholars, of course, maybe 41% or something in that range. Everybody uses 50%, but people have to realize that this is a guess stat number, that if the rate of divorce happened for the rest of people's lives, that would be the final conclusion. But it suggests a lot of parameters that sometimes don't turn out to be true. For example, 20 years ago or so, the demographers were thinking we might have 2/3 of a divorce rate. But in fact, the millennials are not doing that. Millennials had parents who divorced and they went like, oh, I don't want to do that. And so right now their divorce rate has plateaued and is lower than the baby boomers. Now, of course, they aren't baby boomers yet. So, well, they'll never be baby boomers, but they're never the age of present baby boomers is what I want to say. So we don't know, but I'm encouraged because, hey, divorce isn't the easiest thing in the world for sure. So I'm encouraged that maybe the millennials have maybe learned a little bit more about relationships, but also that it probably the most important variable I can think of, and that is they got married later. Yeah, and the statistics pretty much show you that the younger you are, the more risk you take. These people are getting married in their late 20s, early 30s, and they've got their act more together and they know more about who they are with. We're all fantasy expectations when we're 20. At 35, it's a lot different.
Yeah, I feel very different I remember being 35 versus 25, and it feels like worlds away sometimes.
It's a huge decade difference. It is.
Definitely. Okay. So I want to get to some audience questions, but we need to ask you a couple of just basic questions about Married at First Sight. And the first one is, how did you end up on Married at First Sight? How'd that happen?
Well, this isn't supposed to happen, but it did. It fell out of the sky. It really did. I get a call one day saying, we're doing a TV show. Would you be interested? I said, well, I might be, because I've done a lot of media stuff. What's it about? And they said, well, we can't tell you, but we'll talk to you. And if we like you, then we'll send you a non-disclosure and you can think about it. So I didn't take it too seriously because media things come and go and usually go. So we had an interview, and I tell women will know exactly how seriously I took it when I say I didn't put makeup on. So I didn't think it was going to be anything, but I had a good time. And so a month later, they call me and they say, hey, we want you. And I'm like, at that point, for what? What do you want me for? So they say, look, we'll send you the pictures of this show. It originated in Denmark, and we'll show you the concept, and you tell me if you're interested. So I get the program from the Danish version of Married at First Sight, which was the first one. And I was fascinated. And I thought to myself, what if, since commitment is the biggest fear of so many people, that they'll be with someone who they care about, and then the person will say, well, I don't want this because I'm not committed, or I don't want to get serious or whatever. What if it's really serious on a low? What if this arranged marriage, form of American arranged marriage, would make some people would make them try harder, would make them stick longer, because the institution still has real validity for a lot of people. And so I said yes, never expecting, of course, for it to grow in my life to the level it has. And it's been a fascinating experience.
13 seasons.
I know that doesn't happen. In fact, we've been we have a contract, maybe not me, but the Kinetic Content, the producers have a contract for 17.
Wow. That's amazing.
I know. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Okay. Another question about Married at First Sight. What have you learned? I mean, you are a sociologist, so is there anything that you've learned that's different or new compared to the research you were doing prior to or currently do?
Well, some things have been ratified, like the importance of culture, the importance of class, the importance of age, the importance of race. Those things have, hey, we were right. They're really critical. I think what I've learned a lot has been in the sort of social psychology, sort of more, interactional level. I have been amazed at how much people's fears get in their way and actually dictate the outcome they don't want. People are so afraid of getting hurt again that they put up barriers to being known or knowing the other person, or jump at the first thing that they didn't like oh my gosh, he really doesn't like sports, I'm out of here. I just stuff like that. Are you kidding me? So I see people act out in ways that are against what they put all this effort into doing, and that surprises me. I see what the people who are optimistic, positive oriented, they always have a much better chance. That's a lot of his temperament and sort of thinking that things will turn out well, as opposed to vice versa. I think I'm shocked at what people will say to each other. Not only say to each other, but say it on TV. These people know that they're going to be documented pretty much 5 days a week, maybe 12 hours a day. We don't go in the bedroom or the bathroom, but everywhere else is fair game. I've never seen data like this. I mean, most people, either psychologists, sociologists, you don't get that kind of data every day, not just what someone says about how they live, but see how they live. And sometimes when people get mad, they have no boundaries, no stop. And I see it happen over and over again, even among people with great goodwill and usually great skills. But when they're pressed and under pressure, sometimes they will say things you cannot really take back. You can apologize for, but one of the Deathless Lines of Married at First Sight that we now make fun of, and this couple survived it. I don't know how, but they're married today and they're happy. She gets mad at him. She says, basically, they're a white couple. She says, well, I'm just sick of basic Caucasian sex. Yeah. I know. And I mean, what's that? But I don't think she meant it was good. And I think she meant she had a comparison level. And I mean, it was like, so that's a big joke that sort of runs that. They're happy, they got through it. But there are people that say things to each other that are so insulting. And I go, well, how can you do that? It's just because I'll ask people, in their lives on different things, like, has anyone ever said one sentence, however long ago, either from a parent or someone else you cared about, that hurt you so badly that you will never forget it? And just about everybody has. We're tender things. I don't think people understand how much of our inner child we still walk around with. But I could go on and on. I've learned a lot.
Yeah, no, that's a lot. I mean, and just to think that, and it's also memorialized, like you said, so you can say, other things you hear, but you never have to see it again on video or on YouTube or wherever else. So yeah. Okay. And another question, many of us have is, so on Married at First Sight, what influence do the producers have on the matchmaking process? Or what do they do?
Almost none. Almost none. I know there's a lot of reality shows that aren't reality, but ours is. That's why I can live with it. The producers, the impact, the biggest impact is how it's edited, because somebody else who has not been there on a day-to-day basis sees all the film. And in sociology, we have the vision of drowning in data. Well, imagine drowning in, so much information you don't know where to concentrate or which variables you want to put together. Well, here it's like so much film, so much data that you have to figure out what's the kind of coherent story that's going on and then what illustrates it. So that, of course, gives some artistic as well as integrity questions to the editors. And I believe they really, at least on this show, do a great job. But the fact is, the producers, we three experts pick the people. The producers give their opinions, but ultimately it's up to us. The network also watches this thing very carefully, and they will give opinions. But we've never been overturned by their opinions. We have, one of the things we do are give outside psychological tests and also forensic. Here's something a public might be interested in. One of the things we do is we go through their Facebook pages for the last 10 years.
Wow.
And think about that. And sometimes that'll get people we like thrown out that we wish wouldn't get thrown out. But they'll say things, particularly either racist things or sexist things, 10 years ago that they might have outgrown of, but, doesn't matter. It's in print. We can't do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm gonna move, because I know there's other questions from the audience about Married at First Sight. So I'm gonna stick with the Married at First Sight, other questions. And so one question is, now that you are several seasons into Married at First Sight, what are your conclusions on the experiment? Are you finding that it works better or worked or works, or it says like, I think it says it works better or works like arranged marriages in other cultures, I think is what the question's asking. What do you
Well,
think?
the biggest difference from other cultures is in America, you can get a divorce. I wouldn't want to play this role in anybody's life if there was no going back. It's too risky. And we tell people high risk, maybe high reward. We do match people who fall deeply in love, and we have like 8 kids now that are from these marriages. I mean, it's, we feel great. We create families, but we make mistakes, even with thorough examination that the psychological tests don't, and the interviews and everything. Person gets under, stress, and they're different, and we're shocked. And I wouldn't want someone to take something this radical and have to never be able to have a second choice, really. I do like it. I do think the commitment matters. I think there are people who have stuck together that would have been out of there on the first or second date. I can think of a couple right now who would have not, that I can't even tell you how many people, male and female, go, well, that person's not my type. And then they fall in love. You only have to go back to the first show where Jamie, who's now kind of a regular, she does a talk show and everything. Jamie takes one look at Doug, and right after the ceremony, she goes through it. She's in a big heap in her wedding dress saying, basically that the expert betrayed her, and she's thinking of me, and that this isn't going to work. And so I'm watching this, no. And now they're happy, and they had their second child a little while ago. So for some people who have been used to cutting and running, for people who need an enormous amount of reassurance, for people who need to get over the superficial stuff and into what matters, this has been a godsend for those people. Not for everybody, but at least for some people, I feel it's justified, that the experiment justifies itself.
Pepper, you must get the best holiday cards from all of your.
I do. I get a lot of them from our people, and they're holding their baby, or they're, yeah, it's cool.
So cool. Another question. What made the couples on the show that are still married successful? So people like Jamie and Doug, and what differentiated them from the couples that didn't work out?
Well, one thing is commitment to the process. Commitment because they really want marriage and they're going to fight for it. And second is they are people capable of commitment. They can stick with it, and they do the process. We give lots and lots of exercises. We don't just stand back, and the audience doesn't see half of what we do, really. We give them exercises, some of which have been used by clinical psychologists. We also talk to them when they're in crisis. We come in more than you see us sometimes. And the difference is people who absorb it and get it and feel it and work with it versus people who say, no, we're not going to do any of that stuff. It really makes a difference. I think people who know themselves well, who have already figured out what's important to them, and we're able to tell us, because we're not mind readers, we're not magicians, a person who's able to translate themselves well enough to us and is honest about where their weak and strong points are, that we can take that in the bundle that we create of who this person is and use it well. One of the things we do are side-by-sides where we get all the important things a person has said and we match them against, the people we have in the pool. If somebody's given us information that's incorrect, for example, like, I don't care what they look like, I'm only interested in, their heart and their integrity, et cetera, we're going to believe that, I mean, if they, now if we do go into all the pictures and stuff, and if they've only been there with supermodels, we're going to, maybe not so. I mean, we are trying to check against their perception of who they are, but a lot of it is that. I mean, I think also people who are honest, who won't undermine themselves by being afraid to tell the truth, who are willing to be vulnerable, who are willing to change. We need someone who's flexible. I mean, if I hear I am what I am, I go like, give me a break here. Is that forever? Is nobody able to change? Is no experience able to make you change your mind or compromise or see something in a different light? I also think family background matters. It's not critical in every place, but if someone's never felt love, never felt nurturance from anywhere else, they often don't know how to mirror it. They don't know how to give it. That said, I've seen people learn. I've seen people do exactly the opposite and able to share and love and reach out and be affectionate. But, there's various kinds of human capital, right? We talk about that in sociology, that the capital you get is not always economic. It may be a secure background. It may have been a loving mother or grandmother. Those things matter and makes it harder or easier for you to have the next best life you want.
Yeah. And you, just one thing I was thinking about just from watching the show, it seems like both people have to be willing to work or put in the work and do the, like you said, commit to the process. Because it seems like in some scenarios, there's one person that's doing a lot of it and another person that's just completely checked out sometimes. It seems like it needs to be a two-way street there.
If someone's checked out, there's not much we or their spouse can do. But if someone is learning how to trust, there's several situations where I'm thinking, in the case there's two guys and two women, I'm thinking of where the guys were patient and kind and loving. It was almost like, God help me, but I'm a dog lover. It's the difference between like an abused animal that has to learn to trust versus somebody who's never been betrayed. And oh gosh, here's another good thing coming down the road, right? So sometimes the men will love somebody or the women will love somebody, I've seen on both sides, who just needs to be carefully brought along so they realize this person is trustworthy, this person could love them, that they are worthy of love.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So this is what related to the question about the producers. How much of a role do you play and have in making the final decisions about the couples that are chosen for Married at First Sight?
98%. We choose. I'm giving the 2% in that people give us their opinions. And I should say probably a higher percent than that if we talk about people we have to throw out, because when we do the forensic research or the Facebook research or the outside psychologist comes in and says, this person has anger problems, etc., you can't use them. And they'll go low, medium, and high risk. In other words, they're low, this is medium risk. They'll do high risk, and then you can't use them. Oh, wow. So sometimes that happens. We want someone. A lot of times we want someone, but we don't have the right partner for them. Even, but we've had producers and people from networks. Oh, we love this couple. We hope you'll put them in there, but they have never forced us to change our mind or. Where we sometimes get in trouble is they'll get something out of the psychologist's report that we think isn't fair, or particularly for me, I'll just speak for me on this one. Sometimes the early Facebook thing is like 10 years ago. Come on, people grow, people change, right? But they're going like, no, that's in print. We can't do it. And that upsets me because I've lost personally a couple of people I would have really liked otherwise.
Yeah, no, that's hard. It's hard. Those things I always tell people is like, what you put on the internet stays on the internet. Library of Congress, collects all that. Okay, here's a question. And this one is, do you think we're moving away from a marriage / nuclear family model and towards more communal friend-based open family models? And if so, do you think that's positive or negative?
I think among younger people, I would definitely say college age people, whether they're in college or not, that there's much more experimenting with family forms. It almost reminds me of the early 70s, late 60s, where we did the same. But the question is, will the nuclear family persevere as a main stage? I think it will. It's for no other reason if it's less complicated. I look at some of the polyamory things that are going on, and this person is a first and that person's a primary and that's a secondary, person's a tertiary, and it makes my head tired, not because of any moral sense that it couldn't, or just how many personalities can you manage with lives and careers and kid aspirations and whatever. I do think that there is models, particularly in gay and lesbian communities, where friends become family, because sadly some of that because family has been rejecting or non-supportive, and then there's sort of the made families of friends, and they do create very communities of support. I think that's a more acceptable form than it would have been in the 60s and 70s. Whether it's becoming major percentage, I have my doubts, but what do they say? What did the Chinese say? 1,000 or 10,000 flowers bloom, something like that.
Somebody else had a question about, has Married at First Sight ever considered pairing gay couples?
All of the experts, we would love it. They have same, but it does have some very difficult problems, and that is that we can't segregate the possibility of one person meeting another person. We, for example, when we interview, it's all the men and it's all the women, and there's a few in the waiting room, et cetera, but they're different on different days and different places. So, because remember, it's marriage at first sight, they can't have seen each other before. So it's a little bit harder, that particularly with a lot of very tight-knit communities in some places. We don't want people who have known each other. That said, I hope we do it someday. It's possible. It just needs, a little bit more management, but I'm anxious to do it. I'd love it.
Well, that's super exciting to think about. I mean, you have a lot more seasons to go, so there's a lot
That's
more.
True.
And
well, I of course would like people over 50, which we don't do yet. I nag them so much about that. They just don't say it, Pepper, but I just think people with grown kids would be so great in this experiment. But because we don't want anybody with kids when they're young. This is too risky to put kids in this circumstance, but for older people, I think it'd be wonderful. And I'm just saying that out loud.
No, I think it would be great too. I agree. And I think, it would be great. Okay, so so I'm going to move away from some Married at First Sight questions and just more about your research too, but they will definitely, I'm sure. So since the pandemic, it's been very difficult to approach and strike up a conversation with someone they do not know, especially when you're wearing a mask. And this person wants to know if there's any recommendations to overcome these barriers to getting to know someone.
Well, I think I would look for what are the things somebody's passionate about, because if you have a passionate interest, or many, we just can't stop talking about it, right? Mm-hmm. With me, it might be dogs, it might be horses, it might be collecting china, it might be people, there's a zillion things I'd be happy to just blabber on. And I think if you just ask somebody, what are the passions? Give me your 3 things that you really love to do or care about. And then tell me why. I think when you get somebody talking about something that truly interests them, they will tell you, and then you can be off to the races. And you say about yours, and you may overlap or not. But even if I'm never going to be a NASA scientist, let's say, hearing somebody who makes rockets go up and down, I would enjoy hearing about that.
Somebody else wanted to know, this is about gender roles, and what part do you think that gender roles play in relationships? How should we be thinking about gender roles as they relate to relationships?
Well, it's such a big question.
I was thinking that too. It's a great question. It's just a big one.
That's right. Sort of like it's like the elephant. Where do I want to grab it? On the trunk, on the tail, genders has become much more open than when I was younger. So I think I don't want to talk about it in too stereotyped a role, but there are places where I think it really does become way overdefined about women and men and how they should be in various different circumstances, or even in transgender, if you've gone, let's say, from woman to male, where you get all the expectations now as a male, just because, you've changed into a male persona and a male, you are male, but you gather all this stuff with it. And for those people who would like to be fluid, et cetera, it's very hard because people want you to be in one camp or another. And it's not just the biology, it's like all the the ways of being seem to be hard to be flexible about. So I think to the extent that people have different stereotypes about what that requires, like what is a mother and how does a mother have to act, and all of the stuff that's laid on being bad mother or good mother versus bad dad or good dad, and just trying to figure out good parent, good, trying to train it, de-gender it is very difficult. So these are pretty powerful destinations by gender. And if you want to play with them some and make them different, takes a little bit of courage.
Yeah. I think a lot of the, especially gender roles as it relates to child rearing have really, there was a lot of big discussions around that around COVID as well, because it put strain on relationships too, where individuals are, having to choose between their careers and child rearing now. And then who gets that burden in the household is another, big question that kind of falls along gender lines that I've been thinking a lot about personally, as well as as a researcher. So another question. So this one is about high school relationships. Are high school relationships valid? How hard should young people work to make their relationships work?
I'm not sure if valid is the word I'd want to say. I would say they can involve your heart and soul. They can be very powerful and passionate, and therefore dangerous, because I think young people feel things so deeply that they may think the world has ended and the sky has fallen when they don't work out, or somebody cheats on them or leaves them. I mean, I always tell parents to worry about your child when a relationship has gone bad, because sometimes it's their world and they can be dangerous to themselves and feel self-destructive. So I have absolute respect for how powerful their emotions are. Now, the question is, how far should you have to work for it? I'd say anything that requires you to modify your integrity or your emotional safety at some deeper level, anything that goes against what you respect about yourself as a person is too far. But of course, it's good practice to see, to talk about what's going on if you can, and then see if there's some room for both of you to want to make this thing work. I think too often younger relationships, one person is just going to wring themselves inside out and the other person isn't, unless it's a mutual desire to make the relationship, be satisfactory to both of you. I don't think pushing up a heavy boulder up a hill all by yourself is ever going to really work out. But if you got two people who really want to see what there is, I think it's great. I know people who met in high school and lived happily ever after forever. So I don't denigrate their youth. I just think that it's harder to do it as you go through life's changes.
Mm-hmm. So a question, this is a married at first sight question, so sorry to toggle back and forth, but
I can handle it.
Okay, great. Somebody was interested in, you had talked about the psychological testing that participants go through, and just wanted, if you could share just some additional detail of what that act looks like, if that's, any other information about the testing they undergo.
Well, these tests aren't unique to Married at First Sight. Some of them are used from hiring firms, or psychological testing to see if somebody is psychologically prepared to handle jobs that require discretion, et cetera. Depends on what the job is, but some of them will be management of, are there any psychosis? Is this person speaking to trees? Don't mean to offend any of you who do, but are there any, how aggressive are they? What level of aggression is there? How much empathy is there? Does this person think about and react to other people in a way that shows that they can take the other person into account? So as you might imagine, it's on the variables that are important to, work, play, and get along with others. And then to the extent anybody is dangerous. It looks into drug use, et cetera. And I'm sure for anybody who's seen the show over the seasons, they'll go, wait a minute, it didn't catch up. So it catch so-and-so, or this other person, whatever. No, these aren't perfect. And some people are great test takers. And we don't get accurate information all the time. But those are the kinds of things we're testing for.
That's okay. That's super interesting. It's cool. It's really cool to think how thorough it is. I mean, it feels like it would be nice for all of us to get that information about ourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's one of the benefits to people, even if it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
They have had a lot of work done by a huge number of people on who they are, and they get some perspective that way.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too when you were answering the question about high school romances, that because I think you were talking about an earlier answer to a question that when people are getting married later and they're able to use all that they've learned from their past relationships to inform their current relationships. So that's always great too. Practicing that is really fantastic. Okay, so another question somebody asked was so I think you can answer this two different ways, and you've already answered a little bit of it from the sociology side in terms of how have you changed as a sociologist over time from working with Married at First Sight, but has your practice changed even in how you approach couples over time on Married at First Sight as well? Have you seen yourself change, and maybe also that's related to your research again, you could talk about that again, but just they want to know about your practice and how that's changed over time or how it has evolved, especially as it relates to what you've been doing on Married at First Sight.
It has changed. I've learned a lot. I would be disappointed in myself if I said, no, I'm the same 13 seasons later. I'm very wary of people who are too charming now. I would be just drawn in, what a charming, wonderful male or female this is. And now I'm going like, that's too charming. I'm much more aware of somebody's practice at telling me what I need to hear, they're smart enough to know the kinds of things we want to hear, and they're too good at delivering them. I have learned to identify narcissistic qualities better, but sadly not perfectly. But I'm much more alert to it. I am much more likely to dig about what people really mean. For example, and I think I was taught this by Cal, one of my colleagues who I admire. I really love the people I work with. Which is if they say I'm open to something, I go like, well, have you done this someone? Tell me what you mean by open. And open means basically, for example, like on race, they're liberal. They could imagine it, but if they haven't done it, if they can't tell me they've had a significant relationship with someone of another race, et cetera, then this is not the time for you to learn and practice on somebody, right? This is a marriage. We're not into making somebody a guinea pig here. So I listen to language more carefully about what those verbs are or those adjectives are. I focus on certain kinds of keywords. I look for someone so much more. My key thing I've learned for me is a good heart. I want someone with heart. And to me, that's more important than any other characteristic. Honesty, integrity, they're all in there too, but heart goes a long way. And so if someone's genuinely sweet, usually I've got 50% of that marriage solved. I just have to hope the other person is just as kind.
Cool. All right, I have a question here, and I think it relates to you talking about potentially having, people 50 and above on Married at First Sight, maybe for season 16, who knows? So two questions rolled into one. Any advice for people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who are in the dating pool with the hope of finding a romantic partner that might lead to marriage, or a romantic partner and or one that could lead to marriage? And then are there better ways to meet legitimate and eligible people in your 50s in this day and age, other than more dating sites?
Well, I hate to disappoint this person, but I do believe in dating sites, just because of the denominator. It's like, do I want to go fishing in a pond that I know there are 10 great fish in the whole pond? They're great, but there's only 10, versus a pond that has a multitude of fish and I'm going to have to do a lot of fishing to get the really big prize fish, but, you know, I'm going to be catching a lot of fish and maybe one will be good enough, right? So that's what I think about dating sites. I really feel that there's two advantages. One, they have the denominator, they have a lot of people, but also for the most part, someone's there to want to find someone. If you meet somebody at a dinner party or anything else like that, which is great, you get to meet them, talk, see them, but you have no idea if they want a partner, so I do like that. I do like the ones that make you pay because I think that makes it a little bit more commitment. And I do believe you can find, there's a lot of people over 50, 60, 70, 80. And I mean that, I'm not just talking those numbers. The illustration I use is a friend of mine who's, when she'd been married 45 years, she lost her husband, who was a prominent psychotherapist. After a couple of years of grieving, she decided she wanted another partner. And she got in touch with me to see if I could be her wingman to teach her how to use the, I guess wingwoman, to use the technology. And so I helped her and she did a lot of dating. But the other thing, she met some people she really liked. And then some friend mentioned, now as I heard the story, I'm a little confused, but I think it was that she was at a cocktail party and she was very much out to find someone. She said, she'd tell anybody who was interested, I'm looking. And I think this young woman said, you should meet my grandfather. So she did. They met in their 80s. They fell madly in love. They're in their 90s now. She says she's never really been this much in love in her life. And she loved her husband, her previous husband. It's a big romantic story. And it happened because she took it on seriously. I've had people like in their 50s and 60s go like, I went on for a couple of months, nothing happened. No, this is like looking for a job. You just keep going until you find someone. And the other thing is, and I would say this is particularly important for older people, have somebody you really trust tell you what is your impediment and believe them. We all have to do work on ourselves, and particularly if we've been married a very long time or alone a long time, then we're probably not seeing ourselves like others see us. Do we talk too much? Do we seem too tough? Are we not warm enough? Are we wearing the same style we wore when it was really fashionable 40 years ago? Whatever it is, I think we can't consider ourselves, we're never a finished product, and we have to be able to change and if you really want something, admit it to yourself and then go about figuring out how to be successful. What I always say is if you wanted a job, you wouldn't sit in your house, wait for someone to knock on the door and offer you a job. And if you were interviewing and you weren't getting, hired, you'd say, okay, what do I have to do? What I'm doing wrong? Do I need a new Vita? Do I need, to dress a different way? Do I need the words that are appropriate for this, the culture of this business? It takes commitment to it. And saying, I'm going to do this, and I'm just going to take the time to do this. And I feel like the person in the hair club says, I'm not just the owner of the hair club, I'm a customer, but I did find my present husband online. So, I'm not just saying.
No, it's awesome. It's really awesome. And it's great to know, to hear the stories. So this is sort of related to this question, and I think it's kind of a meta question that has come out in a lot of these questions, which is, what is the magic sauce? Like, what is the magic sauce? You've talked already, maybe it's a summary of what you just said. And this is the last question. I should also just let everyone know.
Okay.
And here's the end. Well, what's the magic sauce? What do we do to make relationships work, stay connected? Are there barriers we need to be thinking about? And you talked a little bit about those already, so you don't have to if you want to. And then what can we do to maintain these connections, to have strong relationships, whether we're married or we're not, whether we're old or we're young? How should we approach that if we want to be happy together forever, hopefully?
Well, thankfully, you give me an easy last question. Not. But what I would say, if I have to like funnel down into the fundamentals, I would say you have to be warm. You have to give a lot of praise. It's not just kids that need a lot of praise. We all do. We need to feel worthy. We need to feel loved. We need to feel individualized. We need to know that that person sees us, not just generically male, female, whatever. we need to know that something about this person sees us as precious, and we keep getting told enough to believe it. And it has to feel authentic. You know, if somebody tells me I'm tall, I know they're not looking at me, you know, and if somebody has to recognize you and feel safe and warm. And then you have to listen. You have to really listen closely to that other person. Don't just wait until it's your time to talk. We're all guilty of that. We got the right answer, right? Pick me. But we have to listen a lot more than we normally do, and ask questions so this person knows they're being listened to and feels like they matter, what they say matters. And then, you know, hold yourself accountable. And if you've said something inappropriate, apologize, admit it. Be somebody who can be responsible to what they say and what they do. I could go on, but I think if you have those three, you have a lot.
Thank you. That's amazing. Okay. Any last words of advice before we close things out? Anything else you want to add? Thank you so much already, but any last words of advice for us?
I just say we all need to be loved and give love. It's just as essential as eating and drinking and walking. So if that's not in your life, I think it's worth giving it the time to find it. And if it is in your life, take care of it. It's very precious.
Pepper, thank you so much for participating in today's event. Thank you so much for all of your advice and just learning so much about Married at First Sight and your research. I mean, it's been great. And it's always great to chat with you. I miss chatting with you in Seattle, especially and being near your awesome horses and doggies. We look forward to seeing all of you again for future programs, and encourage you to watch Pepper on Married at First Sight on Lifetime. And stay tuned for upcoming events sponsored by the WashU Alumni Association.